Well, it really is one aspect, I suppose, of subsidies is how the tax law is arranged. And I was a tax lawyer before I went into finance. And when I started my career in finance, one of the things I did was look at the Forbes 400, which at that point had been published for about 30 or 35 years. And I went back and I looked at every single issue of the magazine to figure out were there any patterns.
Every single issue?
I mean, every one of the 35 400s.
Still, that's a lot.
Because I wanted to see what I could learn from it and see what kind of patterns there were about people who made major fortunes. And what I found was that there was actually quite a recurring theme where a lot of major fortunes were made in real estate, in oil and gas, in insurance, and in shipping. And because I had this tax law background, I realized that all four of those industries had in common that they were exceptionally tax favored. The oil and gas industry by deducting for drilling, the real estate industry for depreciation and the ability to take mortgage proceeds out tax-free, shipping because it was international, so it could be organized in a place that paid no taxes, and insurance because a lot of the income was municipal bond income or reserves that management had a lot of discretion in setting. So it really put me in mind of the relevance of tax incentives in really influencing the flow of capital.
And we're going to be including these tax incentives under our broader definition of subsidies tonight, because
exactly.
Some get them and some don't, which is part of the point. But I'm curious, was this younger you outraged or kind of thrilled by this discovery?
Well, I was neither outraged nor thrilled, but I was just very pragmatic. I mean, I just sort of felt, look, I didn't make these rules, and I've just got to figure out how to live with them.
Well, honestly, now, since you've made your own fortune in finance, when you look at the tax advantages that say today's hedge funds get, outrage or thrill?
I would say I think that stuff is pretty outrageous. I don't understand, frankly, I don't understand why somebody like me who's paid for running an insurance company should pay a vastly different tax rate than somebody who's paid for running a private equity firm or a hedge fund. It just doesn't make sense.
Have you ever seen a subsidy that you like?
Have I ever seen a subsidy that I like? Well, again, putting on my pragmatic hat, I sort of like subsidies that I don't have to pay for. So, for example, when the good people of Louisiana decide to subsidize a Tom Cruise movie and pay a third of his $9 million salary, I think that's just fine.
That's a good thing. All right, well, we're going to have a lot of debate about what's a good thing and what's a bad thing when subsidies come to the stage. But thank you very much, Bob Rosenkranz. And let's now invite our four superb debaters to this stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, folks, as I said, we turn into a radio broadcast and a podcast, and because of that, and because your role is actually very relevant in the evening tonight, we like the listeners to the podcast and the radio broadcast and people who are watching on a live stream to know that you are here, that these debaters are trying to appeal for your vote. And for that reason, we do want to say it's absolutely fine for you to applaud when you hear points that you like. We discourage booing and hissing. It is not the culture of what we do, but feel free to applaud. And not only that, there will be times when I ask you to applaud spontaneously, to add a little zest to the evening. Now and then I will say, we'll be right back, and a round of applause, but I won't actually go anywhere. I'll stay here, and then we come back with a round of applause. So I will appreciate your participation in that, starting with our launch as we now formally begin the debate with a round of applause spontaneously. So you work hard for your money, you pay your taxes, nobody's doing you any special favors to make ends meet, and then you hear almost every day about some big company getting a handout from the government, cheap land to build on maybe, or some sort of huge tax break, or just cash handed over. like General Motors getting benefits worth $3.5 billion, Intel getting $3.8 billion, Nike $2 billion. These are spread across many years, of course, but what is your reaction to this? Is it outrage? Where's my handout? Or could you be persuaded that giving these or other companies special treatment sometimes, maybe often, is actually good for innovation and for all of us? Well, that sounds like the makings of a debate, so let's have it. Yes or no to this statement? Eliminate corporate subsidies. A debate from Intelligence Squared US. I'm John Donvan. We are at the Kaufman Music Center in New York City with 4 superbly qualified debaters on our stage who will argue for and against the motion, eliminate corporate subsidies. As always, our debate will go in 3 rounds, and then our live audience here in New York votes to choose the winner, and only one side wins. The motion, eliminate corporate subsidies. 2 debaters arguing for the motion, starting first with Jack Abramoff. Jack, welcome to Intelligence Squared.
Thanks.
Jack Abramoff, you were once one of the most powerful lobbyists in Washington. Your career as a lobbyist ended in a national corruption scandal. Eventually, you went to federal prison for that, and somewhere during that period, you changed sides. And you wrote a book about your rise and fall. It is called Capital Punishment. And since then, you've been working with groups to reform our political system. Is that Herculean task even possible?
Well, it's possible. It's just extremely difficult because Washington's about grabbing power and grabbing money and grabbing things. And people who grab things don't like to give them up, as we'll probably discuss a little bit later tonight. So it's possible, but it's pretty tough.
Okay, Jack, and who is your partner in this debate?
My partner is the formidable Zephyr Teachout.
Zephyr Teachout, hi. Welcome to Intelligence Squared.
Hi.
So, Zephyr Teachout, you are author of the book Corruption in America. You're an associate professor at Fordham Law School. You famously ran for office in 2014, challenging the governor of New York in a primary. You did not win, but you got 1/3 of the vote as a relative unknown, surprising everybody. And now you're running for Congress. So what are you concluding after this experience? Can you win in politics and stay clean at the same time?
It's really hard, and I'm going to do it.
Our motion is eliminate corporate subsidies. We have 2 debaters arguing against the motion. I first want to bring it to Kate Gordon. Kate, welcome to Intelligence Squared. Hi.
Thank you, John.
So, Kate, you are Vice Chair of Climate and Sustainable Urbanization at the Paulson Institute. You are the former Vice President for Energy and Environment at the Center for American Progress. You have devoted your entire career to studying energy and climate change policy. It all started with cows. Not the animal, but the think tank, Center on Wisconsin Strategy, COWS, cows. What sparked your interest in the field?
Well, you know, John, I was very car sick as a kid. And so getting out of cars and getting everyone else out of cars is a lifelong challenge for me. But at cows, I got to work on turning manure into energy. And I mean, who wouldn't want to do that for a living?
Yes, yeah. I wonder if we're going to have some of that happening tonight. Who is your partner, please, Kate Gordon?
My partner is the wise and worldly Mike Lind.
Mike Lind, welcome to your second Intelligence Squared debate. Michael, you are you're a co-founder of New America and policy director of its economic growth program. You've written a lot of books, including Land of Promise, An Economic History of the United States. That emphasizes a Hamiltonian style of governance. And for those of us who need to brush up on our history, what is Hamiltonianism?
Well, in addition to having his own Broadway show, Alexander Hamilton, the first Treasury Secretary of the United States, founded a tradition of constructive business and government collaboration to further economic growth.
Okay, our team arguing against the motion. And again, that motion is eliminate corporate subsidies. Now, this is a debate. It's a contest of ideas and logic and persuasion, and you, our live audience here in New York, will be deciding who our winner is. And the way we do that is we have you vote twice. Once before you hear the arguments and once again after the arguments. And the team whose numbers have changed the most between those 2 votes will be declared our winner. So let's go to the first vote. If you go to the keypad at your seat, take a look at the motion, eliminate corporate subsidies. If you vote for number 1, that means you support the motion. If you vote for number 2, it means that you are disagreeing with this motion. If you vote for number 3, it means you're undecided. You can ignore the other keys, they're not live, and we will lock that out in about 15 seconds. And I just wanted to ask our producers in the back, I'm getting a lot of feedback through my earpiece. I think there's an open mic and I'm hearing constant conversation, which is fascinating. And everything that you've said about me is really fascinating. But if you can shut it, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, looks like everybody's voted. So again, I just want to be clear about this. You're going to vote again after you've heard the debate arguments closed through 3 rounds, and after that you vote the second time. It's the difference in percentage point terms that the winning team has moved up the most that will determine our winner. So our motion is this. On to round 1. The motion is this: eliminate corporate subsidies. And speaking first in support of the motion, Jack Abramoff, former lobbyist and host of the television program Our Nation. Jack, you can make your way to the lectern. That program is available through Amazon and at Our Nation TV. Ladies and gentlemen, arguing for the motion, eliminate corporate subsidies, Jack Abramoff.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. I have to tell you, if somebody had told me 10 years ago that I'd be standing on stage in Manhattan, partnered with a progressive liberal Democratic congressional candidate, arguing against corporate subsidies, I would have thought that as likely as seeing a panda perform brain surgery, or even more unlikely, seeing Donald Trump within 500 delegates of being nominated by the Republican Party. So it's an odd evening in some ways for me. Particularly, we're kind of an odd couple, Zephyr and I. Zephyr, of course, is from the left, I'm from the right. And yet we approach this issue together. We come to the same conclusion. Not always do we agree on everything. In fact, this evening, we may wind up disagreeing on some things. But I think to some degree that gives us a strength that builds our team in a certain interesting way, because we both represent major segments of the country, and the approaches of these segments of the country, which many of you may share one or the other or somewhere in the middle, offer a consensus that something's out of control in Washington, that subsidies, unfortunately, and the other activities that go on down in Washington, some of which I participated in my former career, are really driving the nation in a direction that's very troubling. Now, we could actually have a debate tonight of what does it mean to be a subsidy, because obviously that's a very interesting discussion. Some of the things that I would support, constitutional expenditures of the government, some others would look at as subsidies. Other things that Zephyr might support that I would not support, I might look at as a subsidy. So finding out what is a subsidy is very difficult to figure out. So I'd like to take kind of the Potter Stewart approach, if you remember the justice, when talking about obscenity, which subsidies and obscenity, and some discussions are easily conflated, which is basically you can recognize it when you see it. And most of the discussion of subsidies really needs to center on the vast amount of money that is purveyed to corporations and to others in this country, either through giving out money or through tax breaks. And we sort of know it when we see it. Zephyr is going to come up and she's going to make an argument that these things, these subsidies, aren't fair and they distort the economy. I'm going to argue tonight and right now that we can't afford subsidies. We can't afford them economically, we can't afford them constitutionally, we can't afford them ethically, and we cannot afford them socially and politically any longer. Sure, it'd be great if we had unlimited money in our country and we can give away anything to anybody who wants anything. That would be wonderful, but we don't live in that world. We live in a world of $20 trillion debt. $20 trillion. It's unfortunately something people have gotten so used to that they ignore it. But in a world where you have $20 trillion in debt and you have $500 billion in a budget deficit, the fact that the Congress is appropriating and the administration is giving out $100 billion a year plus to corporate subsidies and $100 billion a year plus to tax breaks for corporations and others, special interests, that is a big chunk of the annual deficit that we run. And in fact, we can't afford this. So we can't afford subsidies economically. We can't afford them constitutionally. And this is more of an argument certainly that comes from the right. But we have a constitution. And based on some of the recent political candidates, it's a good thing we do have a constitution, even if some of them aren't necessarily interested in all their provisions. But we as Americans have to protect our Constitution. One of the things the Constitution does is limit the scope of our federal government. Well, people in Washington, and these are people, Republicans and Democrats, don't really care about that. They expand the scope of our government, and unfortunately this scope has expanded so much that the government is basically in everybody's lives and in every activity. And as a consequence, lots of money flows out. And we shouldn't mistake the fact that when there's $1 available, there's at least 10 lobbyists who are chasing that dollar. And those dollars, unfortunately, the subsidies and the tax breaks, are made by public servants. And unfortunately, these public servants are pilloried by these lobbyists, are set upon by the lobbyists. I know this very well, and I may know it better than anyone in the room because I was one of those lobbyists. And I'm telling you that every program has attended to it tons of lobbyists. And that gets to the ethical issue. We can't afford it ethically. It has bred, the subsidy culture has bred a culture of corruption in Washington where the special interests have tilted the playing field in a way that Americans are very sick of this, which brings us to the, we can't afford this socially and politically. I think anyone who looks fairly at what's been going on politically in our country has noticed something, that there's a rebellion out there, whether it's the Bernie Sanders on the left or it's the Donald Trump, wherever he is on the right, or among Trumpians, or Ted Cruz. People are dissatisfied. Congress's ratings are so bad, their approval ratings are so low, that people would actually rather have a colonoscopy than be in favor of Congress. That cockroaches are more favorable to people than congressmen. That, in fact, and this is my favorite, replacement referees in the National Football League are more popular than congressmen. And a lot of it has to do, unfortunately, with the fact we have a culture in Washington about taking our money and giving it out to those who can lobby the best. And even good ideas, altruistic ideas, things that people say, well, the government should be involved in. The truth is, unfortunately, we now live in a culture where companies go first to the government to get their advantage, and that's our money. And should, in fact, the bureaucrats in Washington be making decisions that, with our money, that people in the private sector, that is the question. I'd say the answer to that is no. That, in fact, our subsidy culture, our corporate subsidies...
Ladies and gentlemen, Zephyr Teachout.
Thank you. I am a huge admirer of Michael Lind and often agree with him. It's strange to be up here disagreeing on some things because he certainly challenged my own thinking. And it is enjoyable to be here with a conservative with whom I often disagree, with Jack. But we do agree on this, and I want to urge you to get away from the little examples and talk about this not as a semantic fight, but as a fundamental democratic fight. Because we have a crisis of corruption, a democratic crisis in this country, and a key driver of that crisis of corruption is corporate subsidies. So I'm going to talk about three things. First, I'm going to talk about how subsidies are used only when law and all other interventions have failed, and we should recognize subsidies as a moment of failure, not as a moment of success. Second, I'm going to talk about how the rise in corporate subsidies has led to a devastation, a decimation of our small business economy, which is the heart and soul of so much of America. And third, I'm going to talk about how corporate subsidies change who we are at a very fundamental level, who we are as business owners, who we are as citizens, who we are as Democrats, small d Democrats. So first, very briefly, like Michael Lind, I believe that the government has a role in shaping policy. Should we be moving towards renewable energy or should we be moving towards fossil fuel? Do we want to have universal high-speed broadband? Yes. These are serious questions that I think collectively people should come together and answer. However, I think the best way for government to intervene in most circumstances is by setting rules that create the opportunity for those renewable energy industries, for that cable to develop. So when you have a subsidy, it's probably because you have bad rules. We should have better rules and less cash handouts. That's my general view. Second, I want to talk about small businesses, and I really see, along with big industry, small businesses, family farms as being fundamental to some of the best parts of a truly thriving economy. It's where innovation happens. It's where community happens. It's where new things are built. It's where we find the next thing. Well, we've had a 25-year collapse in the small business economy in this country. If you look at what real small businesses are, they can't survive. I talked to a woman the other day who's shutting down her diner who said to me, don't forget the mamas and the papas. The mamas and the papas aren't getting the cash handouts. She said, I started my diner so people could get a cup of coffee near Amenia, and right now all the big guys, she said, are coming in and they've got the cash and they've got the handouts, and if we keep going this way, everything's gonna look the same and we can't compete. Now, she's right. She's right on the facts, because guess who gets corporate subsidies? It's not the Metro Diner. In fact, 75% of all corporate subsidies, 75%, are going to less than 1,000 companies. Just think of the 1,000 companies in the Kingston area alone that aren't getting that. So it's a handful of big monopolists who are using their lobbying power to go in and get those subsidies, and the small companies and the small family farms are getting shut out. Now, that isn't to say those big companies don't use the small companies as fronts. They'll march them in and say, like 82% of small family farms now get some form of government subsidy. That doesn't mean they're actually getting the benefit. The reason they need those subsidies is because the overwhelming majority of cash, actual cash, is going to a handful of big ag companies. So we're using subsidies to compete against subsidies instead of creating real open playing fields. So what does this do to who we are? And I think this is so important. I want to live in an economy where the farmer in Cooperstown wakes up in the morning and thinks, how do I get a ground source heat pump in so I can compete better? Not, what joke can I tell the congressman so he'll laugh so I can get some cash? Our corporate subsidy model as a way to do federal policy is turning us as citizens, as business owners, as members of our communities into beggars, into sycophants, into people asking for favors instead of innovating. And think about what that does to our communities. If two neighbors are competing against each other for who gets the favor from the congresswoman, that tears apart community. If they're competing against each other for who puts in the better ground source heat pump, that's great, everybody benefits. But when it's about power and bootlicking, that undermines who we are. Our country was built on the premise of we need to build a society where everyone has an equal voice and is not afraid to speak negatively about the king or the person in power. A core premise of that is that we are no fear, no favors. That's the core premise of American society. We had a revolution to reject the culture of bootlickers and flatterers. What I'm really concerned about is not the examples on the margins, but that as a whole, the way we are making, even good people with good ideas are choosing to make federal policy, is they're saying, if we give out enough cash, we can change policy, and that is turning us into a culture which supports bootlicking and flattery. So I urge you in this vote for those